Mage the Ascension is a pen and paper RPG about being a plucky magician who defies the dark realities of the world by sheer force of will. I already made a video on like the good guys from that setting, the 9 mystic traditions that span from the wand swishing type wizard to the LSD taking type wizard. So today I'm going to be talking about the bad guys who are evil and they hate magic because the good characters use it. In Momo and the Grey Men, these are the Grey Men who are they're bad people and they're jealous of magic and that's why they want to destroy it. Meet Google Drive. I mean, the technocracy. I mean, sure that maybe they do study magic for the purposes of like understanding it, researching it, and maybe they do classify the laws of the universe based on like a complex metaphysical system that includes analogous concepts to the 9 spheres of magic. But they just do that to like understand how magic works. They don't call them like weird mystical names like, oh, the spirit sphere. What a ridiculous concept. It's dimensional science. And yeah, sure, maybe they do use the understanding that they have of those spheres that aren't really spheres of magic to sometimes make things happen that ordinarily wouldn't happen. But that isn't magic, it's science. It's enlightened science, in fact, which is regular science, but gooder. And sure, maybe each of them is also in contact with some sort of entity that guides them on their path to greater mastery over enlightened science. And maybe those entities sometimes have like strange and deeply symbolic sort of, ways of popping into the worlds of these people, sometimes even mystical ones like dragons and fairies. Highly depends on the individual. Might also be a phone call voice that calls you sometimes. But those are not avatars or some other strange notion of like there being a divine shard that exists within all people, but only mages are attuned to it, and that's the defining characteristic that helps them bend reality to their will. That's just your genius. It's like a subconscious manifestation of your ideal enlightened self, and theoretically like everyone has the ability to get a genius, but you are attuned to it, and that's what makes you enlightened. And of course it's gonna look strange and idiosyncratic. It comes from your subconscious. There's nothing magical about that. And maybe, yeah, the genius does take you along a certain path that has steps, and you sometimes fall into maybe a sort of trance-like state, or like an introverted phase where you try to attain a greater level of power. But that's not the same thing as what superstitionists call arrêté. It's simply the amount of enlightenment that you are, and the more enlightenment that you are, the more you happen to understand reality and how to, change it around because you're enlightened. But that doesn't mean that technocrats are the same as mages. In fact, that's really an unmutual thing of you to say right there, my friend. You should stop saying that, or I might have to report you to our supervisor, for your own good. So if you haven't caught on yet, technocrats are in fact, like mechanically speaking on a meta level, but also in-universe, mages. They are humans that have attained the understanding that reality is a fundamentally malleable illusion. And the deeper their understanding of that fact, the more adept they become at shaping the malleable aspects of that illusion. Except, of course, that this is the precise point where tradition mages and technocrats diverge. Technocrats may not call it magic, but they do use magic. And they do it responsibly, because they believe that breaking the laws of nature is reality deviance, and reality deviance is evil. But let's start at the beginning, eh? Reality, the, thing that you perceive around yourself, is shaped by consensus. We went over this in my original Mage video, but basically consensus is a complex set of rules that describes the things that the people who are in a certain area believe to be possible. And what people believe to be possible is not the same everywhere. Not just different cultures and large geographic regions have different beliefs about reality. Where you are within your own city, things might just feel different there. Receiving actionable information on how the future of a given person might play out from like a crystal ball, that might not work in a high-tech computer lab, but in the tent of a fortune teller? Conversely, calculating the probabilities of certain future events might be possible with that kind of computing power. If you've ever been in like a high-tech computer lab, sometimes you feel that things are more advanced here than they are just outside the door. Whereas with a crystal ball, of course you can't do that kind of shit. It's a crystal ball. Both of these effects are magic, and they are actually also the same effect. They're a time, maybe an entropy effect. They're just achieved through different means based on the places that they are in and the consensus that is predominant in those places. An awakened individual can defy consensus and manifest whatever they wanted to manifest anyway, but it is always easier to work with consensus than against it. And so, ever since the very beginning of Magick, mages have tried to shape their local consensus to suit their preferences, and to stymie the attempts of any mages that might disagree with their particular worldview. Thus, for thousands of years, reality was a patchwork, where different things were true in different parts of the world. 1,000 years ago, there really were portals to the fairy realms all over Ireland. Mayan blood sacrifices to gods really did make for a better maize crop. And following the advice of an onmyoji to rearrange the way your bed stands in your bedroom would truly have changed your fortunes in Heian period Japan. There were also basilisks and dragons and terrible fucking demons that would drink your spinal fluid. Magellan really did meet giants in Patagonia. And all that actually kinda sucks. Not the meeting giants in Patagonia bit specifically, that sounds kinda fucking cool. But to just go outside the house and see some sort of beautiful woman, and then she transforms into a giant spider and eats me, having some fucking demonic spirits sit on my chest at night and just torture me, having my actual literal head explode because I heard a weird cry in the woods. It's not a good time, it's just not good to be in an existence that is like this. And I'm not even at the part where some wizard cuts me up for parts because he's trying to make his dick bigger. Let's face it, for most of history, for most people, reality has been kind of a raw deal. And throughout all of that history, there have been some among the awakened magical population who have thought to themselves, hang on a second, what the fuck are we doing? Really, from an ethical perspective, what are we doing manipulating all these people to as treating them as tools to make things for our own personal advancement? Usually while patting ourselves on the back for how well we're protecting them from the monsters that we make them believe in. The world should be predictable to most people. It shouldn't just be that you, because you're awakened, you can use that power to dominate everything. That's fucked up. Being awakened doesn't entitle you to take advantage of everyone who isn't. That line of thinking is what led to the technocracy as we know it today. The purpose of the technocracy is to basically be the antithesis to the world of darkness. It's like the characters of this grimdark universe realized that they were in a grimdark universe and were no. In this setting, where supernatural horrors lurk behind every street corner, the technocracy's mission is to protect people from these dangers and to create a stable, globalized society where regular people can lead good lives without having to worry about vampires, witches, and spirits. And to do this, they must create a unified, worldwide consensus, one where all the rules are the same everywhere. And those rules need to be based in science, reason, not any arbitrary bullshit, so everyone can access the achievements of enlightened science. At that point, is it really magic at all anymore? And in order to achieve this, the world must be cleansed of reality deviance, so that one day, when the technocratic mission is fulfilled, all the world can live in a perfect utopia. If we want to refer to the title of the game that we're playing, Mage the Ascension, this is the Ascension bit we're talking about. That's the Ascension Wars aspect, the disagreements on how Ascension is to be achieved. The traditions say that Ascension is every mage's personal journey to godhood. And quite frankly, because in theory anyone can become enlightened, anyone can awaken as a mage, it's fair. Well, I mean, unless you're like a vampire or some other creature that has suffered Gilgul and has been utterly, divorced from its own avatar. The Technocracy, on the other hand, says that Ascension, without taking the rest of humanity along for the ride, is actually selfish and, pointless. If you're sitting there right now saying, Technocracy, more like Tech-yescracy, these guys do sound like they're actually the good guys, you just keep on listening. The simplified story of how the Technocracy was founded is that it came out of the Order of Reason, which was already an organization made up of several other organizations that was formed around the 14th century. One of the organizations that made up the Order of Reason, by the way, used to be the Inquisition. The people used to burn witches at the stake. Although the other half of the Inquisition was made of mages of the Celestial Chorus, who just wanted to get rid of their rivals. The modern Technocratic Union was formed when several high-ranking members of the Order of Reason, among other organizations with similar ideological goals, approached Queen Victoria herself with their vision of a unified world free from the dangers of the supernatural, where common people could live in peace and prosperity, thanks to all the marvels that technology would continue to deliver. And Queen Victoria said, yeah, cool, bruh, I got a whole police force that's already kind of doing a lot of that. And also my husband used to be one of you. What the fuck did you think I didn't know about all this shit? So my guys are gonna hook up with your guys, and this is not really a request. I'm the most powerful person on the planet right now. I got sunlight on my empire right now. What are you gonna fucking do? Say no, you little bitch-ass motherfuckers? And then the great old men said, chill, bitch. We weren't gonna say no. That fucking rules. That's a great idea. Let's do it. It was in Victorian times, so people used to talk different back then. And don't worry, I do this joke every time that I do it, and it is never funny. And thus, the Technocratic Union was born. It's a very Eurocentric way of telling the story, but it is, not wrong. The Technocracy, as such, was founded in London. But it was also built on the work and paradigms of various scientifically minded mages that existed throughout different cultures throughout history. And as it sort of, went on ahead to take control of the whole world, cabals of those mages distributed all over the world would join them. Often, not necessarily voluntarily, if you catch my drift, because maybe they had very different ideas of what science actually should fucking be. Because the Technocracy was extremely, colonialist and culturally supremacist. As one would have to be, I suppose, to go ahead and say, look, I know the one way that reality should be that would work best for everyone that could possibly exist anywhere in the world. Technocracy used to be really fucking racist. They would bring along their ideology of secularism alongside colonizers in an effort to create a truly unified reality that would work for everyone. They upended the realities that hundreds of millions of people knew and were comfortable with and replaced them with a reality that was alien to those people. This was reflected in their organizational structure as well, where by and large affluent Europeans were in charge, with a few notable exceptions. It wasn't as sexist as you might expect, because not only was the main founder of the organization a woman, it's also the fact that women are just as likely to achieve enlightenment and awakening as mages, as men, has been a begrudgingly established fact in the magical community since forever. Still was kind of sexist though. And on fairness, this is none of these things were things that didn't also happen in the traditions. It's not the colonialist technocracy. No, the Hermetics have their own history of genocide. But in recent decades, the Technocracy has begun to understand that it actually turns out to be a huge waste of operatives and allies and intelligence to discriminate systemically against people with different ethnicities or different, sexual or gender orientations. It may only really have been the dimensional anomaly anomaly that allowed the technocracy to actually restructure itself to being a lot less wasteful and embracing people that were different and not just deeply conformist. Because people who have different perspectives and different skill sets, actually, they're very good at, like, contributing to the kind of complex problems that the technocracy tackles all the time. So they provide shit like no questions asked, full hypertech, gender-affirming surgeries, whether you fall into any kind of like binary, non-binary matrix, whatever. Although, of course, if you go hog wild and like come up with some new sex organs and have those installed on you, the technocracy can do it, but it's gonna be a problem for you because consensus is not gonna like it, just as if you walked around town with like a cybernetic arm that can shoot laser beams. This recent liberalization, by the way, does not in any way mean that they are ready to embrace reality deviance, though. They are pretty rigid about that, and if anything, this whole change has made them a bit more self-righteous. But hang on, Burger, you said dimensional anomaly. What is that? Like, you can't just gloss over that. Yeah, so here's where things get a little more complicated on a meta level. The dimensional anomaly, known to tradition mages as the Avatar Storm, is sort of a magical hurricane that is, raging in the folds of between the real world and like the outer dimensional realms. Oversimplifying it massively, it's a storm that is raging within your walls and also your doorframe. And also kind of outside of it in the Umbra realms, all the different kinds of Umbra realms that exist, but very inconsistently there. Basically, a bunch of shit in the Umbra has been devastated, and it's become very difficult to access a lot of the parallel dimensions that the Mage setting relies on. And it came about like this. In 1999, Xerxes Jones, which is a killer name, to be honest, a technocrat, void engineer, member of the Orphic Circle, which is an organization made up of vampires, wraiths, and mages that are trying to figure out the true nature of death, pulled a lot of strings in order to be able to build a nuclear bomb that would be a nuclear bomb that functioned like a nuclear bomb in the underworld. He wanted to see how it would affect the Tempest, which is like an ever-present margarine version of the dimensional anomaly that rages in the underworld. But also maybe he was trying to like blow up Oblivion, who like nobody really knows this for sure. Meanwhile, the Smiling Lord of the Grim Legion, whom you can find more about if you watch my video on Wraith the Oblivion, set off 2 nuclear bombs of its own, Fat Man and Little Boy of Nagasaki and Hiroshima fame, over the city of Enoch, which is the city where all vampires originally came from. It doesn't exist anymore, therefore it has sunk to like the bottom of the underworld, and it's kind of been pissing off the Stygian hierarchy for a long time. Those detonations then set off Xerxes Jones' bomb long before he was at the spot that he wanted to be at. Meanwhile, on Earth, specifically in northern India, a number of powerful Quajin, which are sort of vampire equivalents that are not actually vampires, they're a different kind of undead that dominate the Far East, were doing battle with Zapatasura, the antediluvian ancestor of the Ravnos vampire clan. There were also like other vampires and tradition mages involved. That's like a footnote at this particular point in time. Why were they doing battle? Well, there was a war between the Ravnos vampires and the Quajin in India being like one of the very central parts of the world, geopolitically speaking, and historically, it's always been a sort of clashing ground. But because the Quajin couldn't reproduce en masse, the Ravnos thought to themselves that they could win this battle by themselves mass-embracing young vampires, which then proceeded to die in droves, which sent sort of psychic shockwaves of pain through the generational bloodline of the Ravnos, all the way up to the creator of the clan, Zapatasura, who was laying in torpor in that region, and he woke up from that. This guy is basically a god. Like, he is unbelievably powerful. And if you want to find out more about him, and those like him, you can check out my video on Vampire the Masquerade. The technocracy saw this situation and assessed it as a massive threat to humanity and the safety of human lives. on account of that is exactly how you should describe this situation. I can think of no better way of describing it. So they used like neutron bombs, which is sort of magical nukes, to weaken Zapatasura and also the Quajian who happened to be there, who were in their own right extremely powerful, let's be serious, and then destroy him with a big laser beam of concentrated sunlight that they created by realigning the orbital mirrors that they have. In other words, the technocracy was kind of a little bit distracted. These three events coincided, and because they all happened at the same time, like a line of causality in space opened between them, and the immense energy released by these things created the dimensional anomaly. Known in the underworld as the sixth great maelstrom, arguably the strongest of them all, it also sort of cracked open the vaults of hell and let demons out, but let's talk about that some other time. In an event that shook the entire supernatural world to its core, it really fundamentally shook up all of the powerful magical institutions. And most of all, it shook up the technocracy, upended it, really. Except, and this is crucial, for the fact that it's not clear whether or not the dimensional anomaly happened at all. By which I mean the dimensional anomaly definitely did or didn't occur in your given chronicle in a certain way or other, but whether or not it happened, how exactly it happened, what it entailed, whether it's still happening, that's not actually definitively defined within World of Darkness lore. If you read the Mage 20th anniversary books, you will find that there's a lot of sidebars that talk about, oh, this is how the situation would have played out if the dimensional anomaly had happened, and this is how it would have played out if it had not happened, and then various other qualifications. And all of the books offer various different scenarios and ideas that you can pick. Or, of course, as always, you could make up your own. There's a whole ass plotline where the technocracy has been infiltrated by Nefandi, which are like, oh, I hate the world and everything is bad, so I want to destroy everything because I'm so fucking edgy type wizards, and that's entirely optional as well. And obviously that's one of the cool things about pen and paper games in general, but also about World of Darkness in particular. No matter how much a lot of people would like to make you believe otherwise, there is no such thing as the World of Darkness. There is only your World of Darkness. With the sheer amount of contradictions and retcons that exist in this setting, sometimes within the same edition of the same game, and like currently with 5th edition, they're retconning pretty much everything, you kind of have to make up the world for yourself, and you are free to do that as you please. Whoever is developing World of Darkness cannot actually tell you how the lore is supposed to be for real. I would love to be able to present to you the real objective World of Darkness, but I can't. I can only show you my own, which is kind of what I'm doing. Personally, I like the middle-of-the-road approach to the Avatar Storm, where it did happen, it did cause an immense amount of havoc, and it did leave permanent scars on the walls of the world. But at this point, it has pretty much subsided, which of course doesn't mean that it's easy to cross the veil between worlds. It never has been. But if you prefer a different scenario, go ahead and use it. This goes so far that if you're like a vampire player sitting in front of your computer, on your couch, on the toilet, in your truck, wherever, thinking, hang on, there is a what? And it has access to what? Jesus Christ, the Second Inquisition is the least of our problems. You can run a Vampire the Masquerade Chronicle where the technocracy doesn't exist, or mages at all, or ghosts, or werewolves, or fairies. Or where they do exist, but they work differently. You ought to communicate this, especially if it's gonna become relevant, or if you have, people who are experts on World of Darkness laws, like, by the way, this might become relevant, but it's not the case. However, I do encourage you not to get rid of the technocracy in your world simply because it seems like an overwhelming threat. Even if you are in fact worried that because vampires are very much reality deviants, the technocracy is going to show up and make short work of them, that's just because the technocracy is very good at its job. Most vampires don't know it exists at all, and the very few who do are probably worried about this exact scenario. But you might have noticed that it hasn't happened. around. It's all fine, they're not going to send a hit mark into Elysium when all the Primogen are there. Because not only are vampires pretty low priority when it comes to threats to humanity, the Technocracy also prefers to be subtle in the way it operates, making as little noise as possible. Oh, a hit mark, by the way, is a Terminator, like an actual for real human-looking killer robot that can tear through a minivan like it's made out of paper mache and that has reflexes that make a housefly look slow and ponderous. That is a real official canon thing that exists in the world of darkness. You'd need like a jacked up, battle-hardened elder to go toe-to-toe with one of these things. Except, of course, for an operation like that, the Technocracy would utilize at least 3 hit marks alongside a contingent of field agents, battle-hardened themselves, of course, equipped with plasma cannons that simulate coronal mass ejections from the sun. But they won't do that, because it's loud and expensive. And also because it wouldn't really solve anything. Vampires are affected by consensus, which believes that they're not real, and that's made life a lot harder for them in recent centuries. But, and technocrats hate him, Cain isn't just a story, or, you know, whoever is the thing that cursed Cain to become the first vampire. There exists a reality beyond consensus, and, mages go there physically from time to time. And vampires, alongside with werewolves and fairies and all manner of spirits and ghosts, are the consequence of things that exist anchored outside of consensus within the objective reality beyond consensus. Very irritatingly, for all kinds of mages, they get their own mini consensus that protects them from paradox backlash for doing shit that is objectively impossible. Consensus is actually an extremely complex and multi-layered phenomenon, no matter how much technocracy propaganda would like you to believe otherwise. This is why, even if the technocracy entirely devoted themselves to destroying vampires, they wouldn't be able to do it. All they can do is limit the damage and focus their resources on dealing with much larger existential threats. Plus, they'd rather create a new resource, something to be utilized to pursue their own mission, rather than create a new enemy. This manipulation of assets outside the technocracy is what agents call attunement. And it can happen in many different ways. Flashing a badge, extending a helping hand, sowing conspiracy theories, making overt threats, paying someone money. It's crude, but it works. Think about this. What is the major social edict, the main one in vampire society? The one rule that not just the Camarilla, but also the Anarchs and even the Sabbat that fundamentally disagrees with this idea respect. It's the Masquerade. The thing that's literally in the title of the game. Make sure humans don't know we exist. You think this is an accident? If so, it happens to be a very convenient one. The technocracy is of course highly suspicious of vampires, but they do not as such currently consider them a major threat to consensus. Some of them even quite like them precisely because they have the good sense to clean up their own messes. If the Camarilla stopped being the predominant vampiric society, that would be a problem for the technocracy. So they can pull strings, they can move things around a little bit, and look, whenever there is vampires that do really step out of line, the situation can't be contained even by the Camarilla, there's always the Second Inquisition. Not nowadays in the new law, but also, why not? And part of the Second Inquisition are affiliated with the technocracy. Other parts of the Second Inquisition, technocracy probably doesn't like because those are also reality deviants. Seriously, hunters give the technocracy big cluster headaches. It is much easier to just sit back, not necessarily relax, do other things instead, and just keep an eye out on vampire society. And maybe then when something like Zapatasura Awakening happens, you step in and do something. Shit, the technocracy even will work with vampires, even other mages who are reality deviants, if it doesn't interfere with their mission and they think they can come out on top of that interaction. Management doesn't like it, of course, so you'll have to keep your fingers crossed and pray that they don't argue with the results, which just incidentally keeping your fingers crossed and praying for a certain outcome is also reality deviance. Sorry. And usually, not even the night folk way beyond vampires don't even know what they're dealing with, that they're dealing with the technocracy. And that's a good thing. Acting unnoticed, getting in and out without a trace, cleaning up messes and never making any of your own, that's like half the training program of the technocracy. They need to be subtle, always intelligence focused, learning everything there is to know about a target before taking precise, surgical action where they can control as many factors as possible. You wouldn't believe how often Second Inquisition activity is actually just some NWO black suit who got careless. The majority of the operations that the technocracy undertakes are in fact focused on convincing the general public that no, there are not, in fact, monsters hiding in the night. Which can be surprisingly difficult when there's, like, claw monsters and fang monsters and tentacle monsters pushing themselves through the rips of reality in the age where everyone has a camera on them at all times. Several cameras even. Look, this one, it has 2 cameras. Why does it need 2 cameras? It has another one in the front. Why does it need that? Because we can do it. We're very good at this technology now. But it is, of course, essential to keep people in the dark about this, because if they found out the truth, it would completely upend the technocracy's mission of creating a safe, one-size-fits-all consensus. A lot of monsters have disappeared because people stopped believing in them. The process of creating this unified global consensus is called terranorming, and it is actually immensely complex as an operation. You see, the technocracy doesn't just get to dictate reality. They don't just say, this is what it is, and then everyone believes it. It subtly manipulates what the masses believe because it is essential that they actually believe it. Can't just be something that they heard the authority say. They need to believe in that authority. It is a delicate art of Overton window manipulation, and the easiest way to get people to buy into their vision is, of course, to make that vision be something that people respond to positively, something that they can gain something out of. Contrary to popular adage, the masses are not actually stupid, and they're actually quite astute at noticing when the situation at large is not really set up in a way that is particularly beneficial to them. It is entirely within their power to reject the reality that the technocracy has manufactured for them. One of the places where this is tremendously illustrated is actually currently post-revolutionary Mongolia, where the technocracy has kind of the grip has slipped, let's just say. A lot of people have gotten back to believing in old or sometimes even new worldviews. So there's a lot of superstitionism, a lot of tradition mages being rather powerful out there on the steppes. Though to be fair, it is one of the few places where the technocracy is losing the battle against reality deviants. The main incentives that the technocracy has are, of course, safety from mostly things that they don't even want people to believe in, but still the abstract concept of safety from whatever ideas people have about danger that are, like, intrinsically tied to monsters. Living conditions, of course, everyone wants good living conditions. And tied to that, of course, the wonders of technology. Now, we've actually talked about the efficacy of technology as a magical focus before in my video about, regular Mage, when we talked about the virtual adepts and the Society of Ether, both of which are breakaway factions from the technocracy. But yeah, you can use technology to do pretty much anything that is unbelievable, which conversely also means that just because you're doing something through technology doesn't automatically make it believable. It will not inherently protect the caster from paradox because it is not inherently necessarily part of consensus, just because current consensus is, thanks to the technocracy, technology dominated. If I get a teleporter pad and put it out in the middle of the park and use it to beam myself to a space station, that shit don't fly. I mean, it also, even if it works, it don't fly. That's the point of it. You go up there without having to fly, you teleport. But the point is, the reality police won't like it. And that is why, when the technocracy really needs to do that kind of thing, they do not do it in the middle of the park. Even though you might think intuitively that that would be a great way to demonstrate that that kind of technology exists. It isn't actually. It is way too on the nose to do terranorming with it. Nevertheless, we have all kinds of technological marvels and procedures that are commonplace today, and which would have been rejected as utterly impossible just a few decades ago. Introducing all that cannot simply be a matter of showing it off and hoping that people will believe what they just saw. The technocracy doesn't even just hand out new technology to the masses. They have already developed it, but what they will do is they will guide scientists and engineers who are sleepers, or at least extraordinary citizens, to its own discovery, which in turn requires astroturfing people's beliefs into the viability of that kind of thing. And then the consensus is supposed to be unified, globalized, and universal across the globe, and it may often seem like it is. It's not. Like, it really is not. Look, right, they're trying to there's a blanket around the world, and they're trying to iron it perfectly smooth. Even though the blanket is made out of an infinite patchwork of materials, and sometimes it changes in size, it doesn't really fit the world even, and it has holes too. Quite frankly, they've done an impressive job thus far. But even within the technocracy itself, they don't agree on what the consensus should be. Especially nowadays that we have this diverse, globalized technocracy that is making the attempt at reconciling the problematic shit it has done in the past. Things are commonplace in parts of the technocracy that in other parts of the same technocracy would be considered blatant reality deviance. For instance, in America, you will get Hollywood physics at the outer stretches of the consensus membrane, where people they get shot, they keep on walking because they're just such tough guys. Dodging bullets, that's a thing they do. In East Asia, technocrats arrange their offices in accordance to the rules of feng shui and commune with their ancestors at the temple. And as a matter of fact, for the Union's self-proclaimed rational atheism, a lot of technocrats are very religious. Parts of the organization have deeply religious roots. Not to mention, there is an almost spiritual reverence for the laws that are known as the Precepts of Damien, which are kind of like the 10 Commandments for anti-wizards. But no, the flowery language is just because the technocracy is kind of an old organization. There's no such thing as them feeling there's something mystical about those words, because there is no such thing as something mystical. But instead of getting into all that, we should talk about how the technocracy is actually structured and how it works. Though often portrayed as the grand puppet masters that pull the strings of everything that happens, and there is some degree of truth to that, the technocracy does not actually control the world. For the most part, the strings that they do have often don't really work all that well. They nudge the world around and hope for the best. And not all of the many arms of the Technocratic Union know what the others are doing, much less are pushing or pulling in or from the same direction. The technocracy may appear like an all-powerful entity with infinite resources to an individual within it, but they operate globally. And by that, I don't just mean everywhere in the world, but everywhere off the world also. The moon, the Mars, the fucking underworld where ghosts live, parallel dimensions where unfathomable spirits sort of hang out, the Hollow Earth, or Hollow Earths plural, they're trying to get into that. The technocracy is everywhere, expensive, and in a lot of places it has to be there quietly, even more expensive. They have a Dyson sphere to maintain around Alpha Centauri. Although, to be fair, rumor has it that they didn't actually build it, they just found it, which does reduce the upfront costs a little. Speaking of which, this video is sponsored, as always, by my Patreon patrons. This video format, the long form thing, which I actually really enjoy doing, it has brought me a lot of success. It's proven itself to be extremely popular among all of you, but it is an order of magnitude more work than how I used to do it, which means a lot fewer videos that I'm putting out, ultimately more content in terms of minutes and hours hours that I put out, but it is less videos, and I cannot cover as much ground. So I really deeply appreciate the support of all my patrons, and I invite you to, if you can do it, if you have the bucks to spare, maybe chuck me a few to keep these lights on up there, because that'll help me pay the electricity bill. But really only if you, can afford it. Don't feel pressured into if you don't have the money, don't do it. The Technocratic Union is a fusion of 5 different large organizations known as the Conventions. These are Iteration X, the New World Order, the Progenitors, the Syndicate, and the Void Engineers. Every one of these conventions has its own culture and its own goals and ideas of how the technocracy should be run, and we're going to be talking about each of them more in detail later. Right now, all you need to know is that each of these conventions is a titanic organization in its own right, and they all work together, ideally playing into each other's strengths, in order to get the job done. You can visualize the organizational structure of the technocracy as like a 5-sided pyramid, and the bottom half of that pyramid is located on the front lines. For most people, that refers to Earth. Some would also say it's places that are just beyond Earth, like the underworld. Really, any place that is, not safe and where the technocracy operates. And then others would refer to that as being behind enemy lines. So really, if you want to be certain that you're trying to get the terminology right, front lines means Earth. Each region of the world is controlled by a so-called symposium, which has the local leadership of all of the 5 conventions coordinating, making decisions, implementing the large-scale technocratic ideas. Symposiums can vary in size. They might cover anything from a major city to a large but sparsely populated geographical area. So London and New York have symposia, but so do Central Australia and the Amazon. They get orders from up high and then implement them on a local level. And also they report everything that happens on a local level up to back on high. Depending on the degree of influence that the individual conventions have in any given region and the needs of that region, the local culture within a symposium can vary also. Often, several symposiums actually coordinate with each other to implement over-regional terranorming and make sure that there's not too much of a disconnect at the borders. Because of course, every symposium has its own individual needs because it needs to prioritize its own projects. So the reality it constructs will be subtly different, but you don't want to rip the sheet when you go to the next symposium's area of influence. The individual conventions, and often also several different conventions working together, create so-called constructs, which in Mage terms are equivalent to chantries. They are safe places, office buildings, laboratories, factory halls, bases, whatever kind of stuff that they need, where the local consensus is trimmed entirely to the needs of the mages that live there. Enlightened scientists that live there. Similar to how some castle in rural Scotland, where the stairwells move on their own, might be conducive to the needs of hermetic tradition mages. Or how a rooftop commune might suit the needs of the Sahajia by there being a lot of drugs. Seriously, a lot of drugs. Just a ton of drugs. And also beanbag chairs. In these places, sometimes hidden in or out of plain sight, but always ultimately hidden, technocrats find shelter, equipment, and stage their operations. Agents within the technocracy tend to be part of an amalgam, an organizational unit comparable to a cabal of mages. Like a cabal, an amalgam is a group of agents, sometimes from the same convention, sometimes from various different conventions, that work together on a project. Unlike a cabal, which is usually a voluntary association, then amalgam, much like most of the things within the technocracy, is very much not voluntary. To its agents, the technocracy is both more and less totalitarian than you think. You're not part of an amalgam because you trust these people and they're your friends, you get along with them very well. Although, for the sake of operational efficiency, management expects you to. Amalgams happen because supervisors are handed down a task and then assemble a team to do the task. They'll look into what agents are suited for it, requisition agents and assets from other conventions as is necessary, whatever they need to do in order to get the job done. Then they put them together, brief them, equip them, and send them out into the field. Amalgams don't necessarily need to stick together for more than a single mission, but supervisors do often find that actually fostering bonds of trust and friendship is good for operational efficiency. This is why, even when an amalgam is not on like a continuous mission anyway, they do tend to be grouped together again on subsequent assignments. So then they do the job, report to the supervisor reports to the symposium reports to management. Yeah, as you can probably tell, being part of the technocracy involves a lot of paperwork, which is far from the only sacrifice you'll have to make. A quintessential dichotomy within the technocracy is the divide of old life and new life. In the past, when you were inducted into the technocracy as a newly awakened individual, often with the technocracy actually helping along in your awakening process, what would invariably happen is that you would officially die and like disappear completely from your life, your old life, and be entirely banned from interacting with any of that. You would start your new life. You'd be trained in the techniques, instructed on the rules of the technocracy, usually on some sort of space station. Your new life will be entirely within the technocracy. So on one hand, you will never have to worry about bills ever again. On the other hand, literally every single aspect of your entire existence is now controlled by the technocracy. From where and how you live, what food you can eat, whom you can socialize with, of course, obviously where you work, which assets you own, whether or not you're allowed to reproduce. Nothing is sacred. You are no longer a person. The technocracy is especially controlling of people's personal relationships because they do recognize the need for love and community that everyone has and claim to provide it without prejudice. But they also use it as an incentive and a means of censure. It's not just that you have to reach a certain rank before you're allowed to marry another agent. And then you need extra paperwork to have kids before or after that. I mean, you're not allowed to have them before that, really, unless you literally do not believe in marriage. Even if you want to have just a sexual relationship, you need to ask your supervisor if you're allowed to do that. Anything that might in any way compromise what an agent is capable of doing for the Union is something that the Union has a right to control. This is also why you're pretty much never going to be allowed to date anyone from the outside either. Now, if you turn out to be a competent and trustworthy agent, you will be awarded certain freedoms. You can have a very nice, very comfortable new life, far beyond anything you might have ever dreamed of in your old life. But fuck up and stop towing the line, and they will take all that shit away in a heartbeat. Now, in recent times, as part of the transformation of the technocracy into a new age of the world, many of the old life, new life dichotomies, the hard lines, have been not necessarily disappearing, but certainly getting softer. Because it turns out a lot of people don't want to leave their old lives, or when they have, in their new lives, are too drawn back to them to really operate as efficiently as the technocracy would like. There's been a change of sentiment where a lot of management has been finding that this actually costs the technocracy a lot of very capable recruits and penalizes agents that are otherwise very, very good at their job. So yet again, for the change of holy, sacred, sanctimonious efficiency, the technocracy has been changing. In North Africa, there is currently a pilot program where many newly recruited operatives are specifically kept embedded in the communities that they are from. And then those community ties are utilized for the purposes of the technocracy. This has not only proven itself to be rather successful in terms of reducing the psychological stresses that agents have to deal with, it's also proven to be a boon to shaping local consensus because people are generally more trusting of what people that they know say as opposed to, strangers, outsiders to their community. And it's also made it much easier to identify individuals who are on the verge of enlightenment, which of course in the past was a major advantage that usually the traditions held. Now, a certain degree of fluidity between old life and new life has always been present in the Technocratic Union. And you might think that this is like specifically a hardline for agents who are awakened individuals, but this is not so. Basically, the technocracy employs three different kinds of people. The bulk of the organization actually comprises sleepers. Regular people who do not know jack shit about magic, but are working at some sort of institution that is operated by the technocracy. Sometimes they might even work at a construct, but they will never witness any of the really crazy, wild, hypertech magic shit. The manager of your local bank, the secretary at Cape Canaveral, the janitor at Weird Shit University. Very few of them know about the technocracy at all, and those few who do are all bound to saying absolutely nothing about it through the magical chaos of the NDA. But they draw salaries from the union, and the union has them on their lists as assets who are sleepers. Then come the extraordinary citizens, which is a sort of catch-all term for individuals inducted into the secrets of the technocracy, or at least some of them. They are the strong shoulders of the organization, the beasts of burden that get the bulk of the hard work done. Often the distinguishing characteristic of an extraordinary citizen is that they have the ability to apply some sort of hypertech, or any other type of magic, and you might not have heard it because it says this in my script, but obviously you can't see the letters I'm speaking, but I said magic with a C instead of the CK, which usually defines magic in Mage. World of Darkness has two types of magic. There is dynamic magic, which we've already talked about. It's the thing that proper awakened mages do. And there's static or linear magic, which is magic that anyone can do if they know how it works. Theoretically, static magic often violates consensus. But consensus is complicated, and static magic does not exist in defiance of it like dynamic magic does, but as a sort of strand that is woven into the complex tapestry that is consensus. So if you know about and understand the enormously complex body of knowledge and skill set that is required for alchemy, fortune-telling, and spirit communion, or in the case of the technocracy, extraordinary citizens, plasma weapons, cybernetics, and faster-than-light engines, you can manifest those effects even when you are not awakened. Tremere blood magic, for instance, is a form of static magic, and some people might argue that all of the vampiric disciplines are static magic, but that's kind of a dubious statement. Unlike dynamic magic, the effects you can achieve with static magic are very clearly defined and not flexible in any way at all. The skills do not translate to related fields. They have very particular rules, and you need to follow those rules precisely in order to achieve the effects that you want. It's like learning to play a particular song on the piano, as opposed to playing, like, just the piano as an instrument. Being able to create new songs or improvising on the fly. And much like songs are created by people who know how to play the instrument or how to make the music, any discipline of static magic will have been created by practitioners of dynamic magic that have practiced that dynamic magic in the same way enough times, and enough people have witnessed it for it to become accepted as consensus. The traditions call these types of people hedge mages or sorcerers, and they kinda look down on them, which the technocracy usually prides itself on not doing. And they don't as much, but they kinda still do. Which is stupid on both sides, really, because sorcerers can be immensely powerful. And the great advantage of extraordinary citizens, of course, is that you can always just make more of them by teaching more people the right things. And in a way, you can do static magic too. You can operate a computer, a microwave, drive a car, do all kinds of stuff that once upon a time was only possible to practitioners of enlightened hypertech. That doesn't necessarily make you an extraordinary citizen though, because this isn't exactly how that is defined. You'd also be an extraordinary citizen if you had some sort of psychic powers, like a telekinesis, fucking the mind control, anything you've seen Professor X do in X-Men. Because apparently the psychics that just have inborn psychic abilities are just also a thing in World of Darkness. I found this out very recently. If in a purely theoretical scenario that definitely has never happened in any way, shape, or form, you were to be a vampire who works for the technocracy and knows about the technocracy, you would be considered an extraordinary citizen. Even if you didn't understand any kind of weird high-tech, hypertech type of stuff, but you still know about the technocracy, you still work for the technocracy, like say you're like some sort of super hardcore commando soldier who uses guns and explosives to kill aliens on the front lines, you'd still be an extraordinary citizen, and there's actually plenty of these types of extraordinary citizens. And of course, finally, the third type of person that the technocracy employs are mages, people who do enlightened science. And the place where the hard old life, new life line is drawn can be different for all of these categories of people depending on where in the technocracy they work. For instance, within the Syndicate, even the awakened, enlightened scientists usually remain the old people that they used to be and retain the old contacts they used to have, because that's very useful to the kind of work that that convention does. The Void Engineers are gonna take you to outer space. So, even if you're like a sleeper who works in a facility that facilitates that kind of thing, you might disappear from your old life entirely. The upper portion of the pyramid, where everything converges, is known as management. If you're an agent, you write reports for your supervisor, who writes reports for the symposium, which writes reports for the labyrinthine architecture of hierarchy that is management. And the thing about management is that it's almost entirely not located on the front lines, meaning they hang out in space. We've talked before about constructs. There's also something called horizon constructs, which is similar to a horizon realm for mages. So even though kinda every technocratic base where consensus is suspended for the sake of enlightened scientists is a construct, when technocrats refer to constructs, they actually usually mean horizon constructs, which are the space stations. They're usually out in the umbra, in a sort of Earth's orbit type umbra, in the like very borderline fine reality region, able to maintain communication but still hidden through hypertech. And they don't just house the upper floors of the technocracy. Horizon constructs are also the places where most agents live, train, socialize. That doesn't mean you take a rocket ship to work every day. There's like quantum tunneling passageways within constructs that will take you there. Much less of a hassle. Every horizon construct is different in terms of its culture, its layout, obviously, the way it's designed, and it highly depends on who's in charge of that construct and what kind of operations are being performed there. And so no matter how nice a horizon construct might look, make no mistake, the technocracy is always totalitarian. It's just sometimes wearing a friendly face. Never forget this. It's everything terrible about corporate culture and military culture mixed together and distilled. Technocratic agents are treated like machines. Supervisors often have to fight senior managers in order to get like R&R, leisure and recovery time for their agents. And depending on the convention, making the argument that they need rest and recovery maintenance like machines is actually going to be a very good line of reasoning. To the Technocratic Union, you are an asset, an investment, and they need to get the most out of you to fulfill their sacred mission. As an enlightened agent, you are not a person, you are just an incredibly valuable asset. Even in the most liberal of horizon constructs, where you get to spend 3 days a week frolicking in the park with exotic, dreamt-up animals, your every action, your every word, maybe even your every thought is being monitored. And if management is of the opinion that there is something a little bit amiss, you might find in your day planner a little appointment to a place called Room 101 for a spot of the all social processing. But if we're entirely honest, most of the really upper management, like the great old men, the truly enlightened masters, they exist way further out than just Earth's orbit. And so a super important factor as to whether and how management actually influences your particular chronicle is whether or not and how the dimensional anomaly happens happened in your chronicle. If it didn't happen, maybe the same entities are still in charge. Or maybe they aren't, but for different reasons. As much as the technocracy would like you to believe that there is a singular tip to the pyramid, there really isn't, actually. That's not a thing. No one, perhaps not even leadership itself, can tell you what exactly leadership looks like. There is one particular manifestation. There's a lot of rumors, theories, and babbling about it, especially among the lower ranks, that does tend to have supreme overriding authority over everything. I am talking about control, with a capital C. Control usually manifests as a human of some race or some gender, it really depends on the encounter, wearing a white suit, and then they just sort of give orders. If you're not top tier management, you will pretty much never encounter control. To the extent that even most middle managers don't, really believe that control exists. But there are instances of control appearing to even the lowliest of field agents, or even the secretaries of enlightened agents who think they're working for some sort of law firm. They've never heard the word technocracy in their life. And nobody knows why control does this. Though control's authority is compelling and absolute, it does tend to be a bit more gentle than certain other, elements of management in the way it gives orders, a little more respectful. Now, depending on how you run the dimensional anomaly aspect of your chronicle, control might be around or it might not be around. If the dimensional anomaly happened, probably not, but maybe if you feel like it's a necessary element for your chronicle, put it in there. The main thing though is if the dimensional anomaly happened in general, most of especially senior upper management will have been cut off from the rest of the pyramid, disappeared in the wherever. The more severe the dimensional anomaly was, the more horizon constructs were lost in the process. If it's still ongoing, there might actually not be any viable horizon constructs in your chronicle at all. In the standard middle-of-the-road scenario, most of the upper middle management type people are present on the near-Earth horizon construct space stations. Some of them surviving, others rebuilt, a very few built anew. And so, in this scenario, a major problem continues to present itself. The people in charge of the Technocratic Union are utterly out of touch. And by that I mean both with reality and the lower steps of the pyramid. There is perhaps an irreconcilable schism between the ideals of management and the realities of working in the field. According to management, there is no ambiguity in the world. Everything is either consensus appropriate or reality deviant. There is only adherence to protocol or failure. Bending the rules to get the job done is not possible. This is not a scenario that ever occurs. Management is in the business of making reality, and if reality does not perfectly align with the thing that they have in mind, it's because of the incompetence of the field agents. This is one of those inherent contradictions within the technocracy. Mages are defined by their ability to bend reality to their preferences, and bending reality to a certain preference is exactly what the technocracy is doing by shaping consensus. Technocratic leadership is composed of visionaries in this regard, and not only do their visions of reality not align with each other, they certainly do not align with consensus. For many mages, actually, there comes a point where they reach a level of self-actualization where they cannot live on Earth anymore. They need to make their own horizon realms with their own rules that accord to their worldview, because if they stepped on Earth, Paradox would pretty much immediately rip them apart. The enlightened masters of the technocracy have the option to exist in worlds where all of the work that they envision the organization doing is already done. In fact, they have to exist in those places. So why would they not go there? Especially if they are aware that their presence at the front lines might cause disturbances in reality that would not be particularly beneficial to the mission of the technocracy. The problem is that the places they do hang out adhere entirely to the rules of reality that they envision. To have the kind of power they have, they must believe in those things very strongly, and they are never confronted with any contrary facts. Things function very neatly in the theories they have on how things should work. They require sometimes only a tiny adjustment in how you view the world. But only in that sterile context, because on the front lines, these things often represent fundamental shifts in reality itself. The theory may say that something is there, but it just isn't. And to management, this usually means that the field agents failed to look hard enough for it. This promotes a sort of gradient of out-of-touchness and deception the farther up you go the pyramid of management. An honest supervisor that informs management about why their plans cannot work is not going to get very far. If you want to make it in the technocracy, you need to indulge management. In a sense, ineffective operations and making shit up in the interest of placating the visions of reality that management has is a much quicker path to promotion than actually trying to suss out why the idea that they had did not work. This creates a set of systemic conditions that inherently favors self-interested leaders that want to grow only their own power to the detriment of everyone else, and have very little in the way of moral convictions when it comes especially to social manipulation. Petty authoritarians who delight in having power over others, punishing people for sport, keeping them in line with fear. There's another type of leader, one you will find only rarely in the technocracy. These are empathetic paragons who inspire actual loyalty in their subordinates, who treat them with respect and compassion because they understand that they are as accountable to their subordinates as they are to the people that give them orders. In an organization like the technocracy, which is ruled by the first type of leader, the second type of leader is almost never going to get promoted. It threatens the leadership of the petty authoritarians by being, uncontroversially, more effective. It is just an objectively better leadership style that inspires actual loyalty, real respect, not just respect based on rank, but respect based on the person. These are the types of leaders that you would go the extra mile for because you know they would do the same for you. And if you're a fucking asshole, sociopath, piece of shit, you're not going to promote people like that, because if they climb in rank, if they accrue more power, they might become a threat to you one day. Wow, what a fucking really fictional thing that is completely made up and not in any way an extremely accurate representation of much of the culture of today, and also for many decades and centuries. This is a fictional thing that isn't real. This is just one of the perennial big organization problems that plague the technocracy. Here's another one. If someone is always promoted when they do well, the place that they ultimately will get stuck at is going to be the place in which they were the least good. Because once they're no longer extremely good at their job, they stop getting promoted. Everyone is promoted just beyond their degree of competency. On the other hand, many incompetent people often get promoted up and away because, you know, if they're not doing the actual work, maybe they will be less damaging to the organization. This then leads to some people doing deliberately shoddy work because they think this will get them a better paid and privileged position. The technocracy has the fewest issues with this last problem, but even in spite of their very complex review standards and a system that actually kind of works in that regard, it still comes up. But okay, enough about the fucking bureaucracy and the paperwork. Let's talk about the cool shit, the magic that isn't magic. Or as some agents unmutually call it, Technomagick. To get this fully out of the way, technocrats can achieve any of the effects that tradition mages can achieve if they have the right spheres and like power levels in terms of enlightenment. What makes the spells happen, and technocrats call them adjustments or procedures, not spells, because, you know, not magic, is still the willpower of the caster imposed upon the world. It's just that the tools the technocrats use are if not outright technological, then definitely never mystical. And the options for that are actually rather vast. I will get into a lot of them a bit later when we talk about the individual conventions, because each of them has its own preferences. But ultimately, of course, every enlightened scientist has their own foci that they use and that they're comfortable with. Being based in science and technology is actually a huge advantage for the technocrats, because people these days are much more inclined to believe that the strange thing that just happened was the result of some, like, strange machine that they don't really understand, as opposed to the flick and swish of a magic wand. In other words, Technomagick is more often than not coincidental, and thus doesn't expose the caster to as much risk to paradox. But technology won't just make anything believable, which is where we enter the realm of Hypertech, which is basically Magick, it's Clark-tech, it's technology so advanced it is essentially indistinguishable from magic, and that's not a good thing for consensus, because, you know, it is magic, so a big old plasma gun will incur paradox all the same. There's actually quite a bit of hypertech that no one in the technocracy really expects to ever enter consensus. It is, however, especially when you're dealing with extra-dimensional threats and various types of reality deviants, very useful to have that kind of hypertech on hand. This is how the technocracy justifies not only having all of those magical abilities, but also using them. And quite frankly, when you're hanging out in places where there is no paradox anyway, you'd be massively handicapped if you didn't use any hypertech. They develop hypertech to deal with the kind of stuff that exists in the objective outside non-consensus reality. Like Ghostbusters guns, those like backpacks that the Ghostbusters use. Don't worry about crossing the streams, they have a safety shutoff these days. They've learned a lot in the engineering department. Speaking of ghosts and the underworld and the dead, here are some of the strange things that the technocracy has within its organization that you would never expect to find in consensus. And it starts with actual, for real, undead zombies. And elementals, which are like the golem predecessors of the modern machine robots that people use back when robot technology wasn't as advanced within the technocracy. Of course, the only place you'll probably find elementals are in museums at this point. But really, aren't robots just metal elementals? You have things called xenotransplant enhanced operatives, which some people in the supernatural community outside of the technocracy who are aware of them refer to as abominations, which are usually created by progenitors as amalgamations of various different kinds of nightfolk like vampires and werewolves, but the same. But might also be technocratic agents who had certain attributes or abilities sort of cannibalized from various types of nightfolk and implanted into them. Bear in mind also that the term abomination in the world of darkness in a different context means specifically werewolves that were turned into vampires, which is technically not supposed to be possible, so who knows how much the work of the progenitors sort of altered consensus in that department. Every piece of technology you have seen in a sci-fi film, the technocracy has it. Faster than light travel, black hole generators, life extension serum, cybernetics that will augment your abilities, you will put Adam Jensen out of a job, all he'll be able to do is work as a Balenciaga model. Talk about a fucking job he never asked for. They can mind trawl your thoughts and, like, rearrange your memories. They are more bound to the technological foci to make their magic happen. They can't really do it without them. But the real trick, the thing that really gives technocrats an edge way beyond that, is the fact that they have and use requisitions. So basically, if you are an enlightened scientist, technocratic agent, you are going to manifest effects using all manner of gadgets and technology that you usually have access to through your spheres. But if for the sake of a mission you really need to work some different kind of technomagic, you can ask your quartermaster and they will see what they can do. Basically what's happening is that the technocracy is producing magical items on an industrial scale. And these magical artifacts are actually rather expensive to make, much more so than if an agent were to manifest a equivalent effect with the spheres that they have access to. But not only does having the option to requisition oneself with these kinds of items make amalgams immensely flexible, magical items can in fact be used by pretty much anyone who has been instructed in the basics of their use. Now, granted, those basics are sometimes not particularly basic, but you can see how this would be a massive advantage. Just a small selection of the things that you may requisition from the technocracy include hit marks, the Terminator robots, which, depending on how, the rights of sapient machines are handled in your chronicle, may or may not be fully fledged agents in their own right. Universal translators that will allow you to perfectly communicate with literally anyone. This includes ghosts who speak long-dead languages that no one knows anymore, spirits that communicate in ways that aren't even language at all, fucking aliens from the fringes of outer space, which, to be fair, according to the technocracy, is also their spirits. Those things are also spirits. The flashy thing from Men in Black that you can wipe people's memories with. Saber-toothed tigers, which are exactly what they sound like. They're literally saber-toothed tigers, but cyborgs. And there's a ton of these running around in the Amazon, and who the fuck knows why they were created? They're cool. They also have cousins, which are like cyborg house cats that they put in households of important sleepers and sometimes just important agents, not just to surveil them, but also primarily to protect them. Should a reality deviant of any kind show up to attack these assets of the technocracy, that those cyborg cats, they have fucking laser eyes. Also, they have space stations full of dinosaurs and dragons and shit. They have a thing called an octopus suit that you put on, and then when you put it on, you can program it to make you look like literally anyone you want. There is a discount version of this, which is essentially a sort of masking kit that allows you to, the Hollywood films where they take off, the face mask and it was, a perfectly canny face that looked completely like the person that they were trying to emulate, and all, weird shit going on. Drag it off, boom, different person. Technocracy has that, much cheaper than an octopus suit. A fucking CIA heart attack gun, a gun that gives you heart attacks. Skills that can be uploaded into your brain for just a few minutes they need to put them in there. They won't last very long, but you probably won't need them for that long. There are options for those skills to last a little longer. It's just you'll need a sleep therapy where they teach you those things while you sleep. They have spray cams, which are spray cans, the ones that you do graffiti with, but the spray stuff that you spray on the wall is the camera. You know the old Wednesday family trope with the hand, the undead hand that crawls around and acts as your assistant? Them being made out of flesh has sort of fallen out of fashion, but mechanical ones are still very, very popular. Cloning, obviously, they clone people, even their own agents. So if you ever feel like a group of technocrats all look identical, they do. Foldable doors that you can set up anywhere over another door, and then it will teleport you to a space station. That's the kind of stuff that the technocracy only very rarely authorizes, by the way. Star Trek style tricorders that you can point at anything and it will tell you exactly what that thing is, even if it's some sort of magical or entirely alien material. Ghosts in the machine, actual for real artificial souls. Not the souls of dead people, but souls that they made that live in the virtual world. They got target-seeking grenades that you cannot hide from. Or, the whole heroic sacrifice grenade thing where you chuck yourself on the grenade to, save your compatriots from being blown up by it. It'll wiggle out from underneath you and then blow you up anyway. Anti-magic handcuffs, because duh, of course they have those. A bomb that makes you stupid. Literally an IQ nuke. Gecko gloves and shoes that allow you to just walk on any wall or ceiling in a way that would make ninja spiders jealous. Come to think of it, they probably have ninja spiders. Very simple key made out of gel that you can put into any lock and it'll unlock any door. Deluxe version of that will even unlock magical doors for you. An app for your phone, you point it at a wall, you can see what's behind the wall. Literally anything you can come up with, they have it. And you can requisition it. You best be careful how to use it though. Some of these babies have an immense capacity for collateral damage. And every single unenlightened civilian, no matter how unimportant they may seem, is a link in the chain of consensus. The technocracy does not like it when civilians die. If you use requisitions frivolously or in a way that management thinks was unwarranted, you are going to be getting some problems. Always remember, your job is to protect humanity and to use as few technocratic resources as possible doing it. Alright, now that we've been through all that, let's talk about something that, if you're coming from the perspective of the traditions, you may think is the end-all be-all of being a member of the technocracy: the conventions. Now, don't get me wrong, which convention of the Technocratic Union you belong to is immensely important. But you should never, under any circumstances, forget that you are first and foremost a technocrat. Traditions and crafts, they like to have their bickering going on, they like to put their immediate alliances first. In the technocracy, any sign of this is going to get you fast-tracked for social processing. Each of these conventions also has sort of sub-conventions called methodologies. They're kind of the departments that focus on the various specialties of each convention. Old ones are dissolved, new ones appear all the time. Some stay for extended periods. Often they are formally established institutions, sometimes they are sort of loose associations. Some methodologies do things that lie somewhat outside of the competencies of a given convention, but which are tasks that have been assigned to them because they need to be done. Like Iteration X, for instance, has a sort of SCP program in Myanmar, which is a spot in the world where many trade routes converge, and so artifacts from East and West and everywhere, they hang out in that country a lot. They're hardly archivists or anything like that, but they are suited to the task in some manner, and it's a task that needs to be done. Sometimes methodologies are there primarily to interface with other conventions. We're going to talk about some of the methodologies of each of the conventions today, but to make it an exhaustive list would be a waste of time. Iteration X is a big, happy family. And by family, I mean machine. And by happy, I mean precise. And by big, I mean big. That's the word I was looking for. It's the right word this time. Bet you didn't fucking see that coming. Iteration X believe themselves to be the sort of upgrade to humanity as we know it. The next iteration, if you will, of our species. They see the entire universe as an infinitely complex, yet entirely quantifiable engine. And evolution is the mechanism by which this engine improves itself. To iterators, the selective pressures that led to humanity developing intelligence were ultimately inevitable. And the evolutionary purpose of intelligence is to give oneself all of the evolutionary advantages that no other life form ever could. To very much all iterators, that edge is in fact cybernetics. Cyborg transhumanism, symbiosis with the mechanical, that's just an entirely natural state of evolution. Every single member of this convention is cybernetically enhanced. You got your implanted eyes that can see through walls, you got spring legs that can jump from building to building, hands that transform into guns, faces that transform into flamethrowers, hyper-resilient organs like lungs that'll allow you to breathe mustard gas like it's the air in the Rocky Mountains. I don't even actually know if the air in I assume the air in the Rocky Mountains is good somehow. I have to ask like James Tullis if that's the case. Or drink cyanide like it's spring water. Not all iterators are enhanced in the same ways and to the same extent, of course. They all wish they looked as good as I do right now, but unfortunately most of them you wouldn't even recognize as being cybernetically enhanced if you ran into them on the street. On the front lines, any type of cyberware more sophisticated than a hearing aid will expose you to paradox. So even though most iterators really want to get rid of the weakness of their flesh, very few of them are actually allowed to do so. And the type of enhancement that they have differs from person to person because they're not all given the same purpose. That's only a half-baked choice of words because Iteration X is an extremely collectivist organization that doesn't really have that much use for individual persons, just individual platforms. They are the Borg, and though some of them might look superficially different to others, ultimately the goal is that they are all the same. The only outliers are outliers for a purpose and kept around as a convenience. Iterators claim to be entirely unsentimental. They are well coordinated and carry out everything according to complex plans that they calculated every possible outcome of. Everyone and everything is inherently predictable, and if you lose something and in retrospect it will have been worth it to lose that thing, that would have been the best option to take anyway. Here's the problem with that. Though the quantum computers that they use to calculate complex outcomes in the future are very capable, they're extremely impressive technology, they quickly fall apart when they try to predict large-scale things, especially when humans are involved. Because humanity is inherently messy and unpredictable. But iterators are engineers much more so than they are scientists. So to them, the fact that humanity is unpredictable is actually its greatest flaw. It's the one thing they're all convinced is a trait that needs to be iterated away and out of humanity. Unpredictability, not a problem with them, a problem with us. By us, I mean them. As you can clearly see, an iterator. When it comes to terranorming, they naturally push for advances in cybernetics so that all people can become hybridized with machines and all of humanity can become the highly advanced, unstoppable precision engine that it is meant to be. Never mind that this doesn't work, often within the convention already, and they recruit pretty much exclusively from people who subscribe to ideas of, order and obedience and hierarchy. Soldiers, office drones, certain types of, very structurally oriented mathematicians, people who feel very comfortable getting orders, carrying them out, and, losing themselves to the greater collective. They get their unambiguous instructions and are expected to carry them out perfectly. God help you if you make a fucking mistake. And it turns out most of humanity is not like that. Still, the iterators continue to assume that that's just how it's supposed to be. Within the technocracy, Iteration X serves two main purposes. For one, they have the majority of the technocracy's industrial capabilities and know-how. Iterators are constantly optimizing the efficiency of their tirelessly operating manufacturing programs. If you requisition a piece of hypertechnology that can be mass manufactured, sometimes even something very specialized as well, chances are it was made by Iteration X. The other purpose of Iteration X is to be the army of the technocracy, the firepower, the big guns, the cavalry. Look, all the conventions have some degree of martial capability, but Iteration X is the technocracy's fine-tuned war machine. Not only are their soldiers packed to the gills with cybernetics, their strike teams are perfectly coordinated. There's no, disobedience going on. And all those fancy prediction algorithms that break down on a large scale, they work very well in pretty much every kind of military scenario. War is, after all, mainly about numbers, and numbers is what Iteration X does best. In terms of the type of tools that iterators use to channel their Technomagick, their foci, of course, every kind of cybernetics is king. Ultimately, whenever they do something impossible, it comes down to some type of wild upgrade they had installed. But as much as they love their flesh-made chrome, they also are really into mathematics, higher mathematics, hypermathematics, impossible algorithms, raw computing power. Every iterator needs to have a number of labyrinthine Excel spreadsheets. Just run the numbers, then brute force your way there. They also have various meditations and mind-calming machines, sometimes aided by microchips in their brains, to make themselves into better conduits to perfectly obediently follow orders. Famously though, and most iterators will only do this when they know that no one is looking, a major focus is having a personal relationship with the technology, the machines that you work with. Treating your equipment with the type of kindness you would usually only afford living things. In spite of its obvious spiritual nature, it's a very common thing that they do. Some of Iteration X's methodologies include the biomechanics, who for a long time were mainly focused on building combat cyborgs, but have recently been allowed to return to their original purpose of designing experimental cybernetic technology. The macro technicians, who analyze hypertech and devise new ways of mass manufacturing them. And the statisticians, who collect and collate as much data as they possibly can about absolutely everything, and then they plug it into various models that they then use to calculate all manner of everything with various degrees of precision. The NWO knows everything. For instance, it knows you personally, David. And it also knows exactly what it is that you know. And whatever it is that you know, the NWO put it there for a reason. So don't you worry about it, David. There's no need to question anything. It's for your own protection, David. We're just doing what's best for you, man. So when people think of the technocracy, most of the time they think of people in Black Mirror shades that show up to places and make things disappear after some weird shit went down. And that is very much on purpose, because it is exactly the image that the NWO is trying to project. They are, in a way, the PR department, the public face of the technocracy. And implacable agents of the law vested with authority way beyond what you think ordinarily a government might be able or willing to do in a given situation. That's a pretty fucking good image to be projecting when you want to seem more intimidating than you actually are. Not that the technocracy isn't intimidating. If you ever run into a black suit and you're not intimidated, I don't know what to tell you except you might be a lost cause. And let's not even talk about a gray suit. Think about this for a moment, right? All of the other conventions, they have interesting names. But the NWO is something you've heard about. And not just within, like, World of Darkness lore, but in, like, conspiracy theory or half conspiracy theory type places. They are the puppet masters, the deep state, the ones who control the media and the intelligence agencies. When it actually comes down to the brass tacks of shaping the consensus, the NWO is who do most of that work. From big Hollywood mass market releases to very specific academic treatises that like 5 people are going to read in total, the NWO put it there for a reason. Yeah, you wouldn't believe how many actual academics, philosophers, sociologists, psychologists, historians actually work for the NWO. Even ones whose ideas seemingly oppose each other. Not that they'd necessarily know, of course. The NWO is the largest technocratic convention when it comes to raw numbers, but that is mostly because they have a huge number of assets embedded in pretty much every community that works in their vast intelligence network. That grandma who calls the cops every time children are too loud in the street? She's an NW asset, she just doesn't know it. It is the big brother of humanity who knows better than us what we should know and what we should be able to do. They keep an eye on us, like every good big brother should, and they keep the other eye on the aliens they have at Area 51, because they have aliens at Area 51, just as a thing that I'm saying to you. Random fact, they do all the cover-ups and gather all the intelligence that ensures that technocratic operations go as smoothly as possible. And within the technocracy, they act as a sort of secret police. They assess the loyalty and the reliability of agents, and also find the rogue ones and bring them to heel. Which doesn't necessarily mean that they will kill them, just like awakened agents are incredibly rare and valuable assets. You don't just go around killing them for no fucking reason. But they want you to think that they will shoot you in the head the second you ask yourself why they chose to paint the cafeteria this particular shade of beige. The truth is that eliminating any agent that could have otherwise been an asset, even people who are outright reality deviants, tradition mages, is very wasteful. And there are other methods of changing your mind. Much like Iteration X, the New World Order is collectivist and conformist. And where Iteration X is a little more communist, the NWO is a little more fascist. If that is a word that you want to hear. It's true though. For a long, long time, what they try to do is make all of society behave the same. They worked very hard to create a universal blueprint of how life should work. What things you have a choice in, what things you don't. And any deviation from that introduced instability and thus needed to be purged. Not overtly, of course, at least not immediately, but through shunning and ostracization. Subtle social sabotage. Sure, James Bond is like a classic NWO agent, but most NWO ops are rather rather a bit more subtle. Or dull. Also dull. It's probably even a better word, really. They do recruit mainly from military and law enforcement backgrounds, but there's also a lot of media types, thinkers, even some types of artists who have a vision that they don't just want to share but impose upon the world, that upon awakening to their magical powers are recruited and inducted into the ranks of the NWO. Regardless of gender or ethnicity or other factors that might make them different, they're all put in these kinds of black suits, which are bulletproof, by the way, just thought I'd mention that, and they are all stripped of their identity, because of course, the technocracy comes first. And it turns out, and this is true, that applying this same principle to all of society doesn't fucking work. Which, in fairness, they have realized like a few years ago already, but this ship is very slow to turn, and a lot of the damage has already been done. A shining example of this is the United States of America, where the NWO's attempts to enforce conformity on a deeply diverse society has sort of succeeded itself into failure. They have created a time of perhaps irreconcilable social and political divides. And while much of the convention is of the opinion that the best way to go is to just cover everything in duct tape like they always did and hope for the best, others have ironically started funneling large amounts of money into like Antifa and armed leftist militant groups. Because a lot of these agents are currently looking at the fabric of society breaking down and asking, do you folks remember what happened the last time that this happened, like 100 years ago roughly in Central Europe? Remember how we put like money into the fascists to prop them up because we thought they would be an extreme but ultimately stabilizing influence? And do you remember what happened after we did that? Do you remember what happened after that? Do you remember it? Maybe, on account of how all of that worked out, let's do the fucking opposite of whatever we were doing back then this time around. Many NWO operations have pivoted in their goals and protocols significantly, as instead of trying to enforce a sort of top-down social control, they've attempted to adapt to the inherently chaotic and diverse nature of humanity. They have shifted from overt enforcement of conformity, which ultimately just led to disconformity happening in secret. People were still gay, they just were hiding it now, to an attitude of, if not necessarily encouraging, then certainly tolerating a huge amount of disconformity, which, though perhaps a little more volatile, is also much easier to keep an eye on and tally. It turns out that people don't actually like to have to hide that they're gay when they are gay. And as we've been over before, it's very important that people like the technocratic consensus. At this point, the NWO even supports environmentalist groups as well. Although they do kind of focus on the neoliberal environmentalist groups that focus on policing consumer behavior as opposed to addressing the production side issues that are the actual cause of climate change. What they do can never be about the sort of class struggle that climate change activism it needs if it is to succeed and actually beat this dragon back. So they are once again sort of agents of trying to keep things static and like the same, even though really a lot of adaptation is required. But hey, they have changed, improved even, in many major ways with the general shifting of things in the technocracy. To focus their enlightened science, the NWO uses literal actual meme magic. Like, that's the main thing they do. They control memes. And through them, they shape the consensus and give themselves the ability to break it too. Fed posts are in fact NWO spells. Part of those memes are of course the clothes they wear, their body language, the badge they flash. Just the act of talking to people can be a way of manifesting magic. Especially if it involves some sort of complicated jargon or lingo, which if you think about it is kind of just how Hermetics mumble spells in Latin. It's just that an NWO agent is going to say that Tango is bound to be OF in T-minus 10 seconds. Paperwork, also a very useful tool to bend reality to your will. They also have a plethora of incredibly cool gadgets developed by Q Division. And yes, that is once again the James Bond Q from the James Bond movies, the person that makes all the gadgets. But these are not like all that super obvious mechanical cyborg shit. I have a fine liner pen here that's gonna make you bust a nut prematurely. and it looks like just a regular fine liner pen. You are now cursed with premature ejaculation. Field agents that actually do see combat often like martial arts as a focus for their abilities, which you may think is more on the mystical side, but is actually rather widely accepted within the Technocratic Union. And when it comes to intelligence gathering, computer viruses, like cool hacking interfaces that you type in, big databases full of all kinds of information that is vaguely unsorted. Those are the kind of things that will produce very powerful spell effects. Some of the NWO methodologies include the Ivory Tower, which controls the official convention and in many ways technocracy ideology, and disseminates certain thoughts to leading academics and intellectuals around the globe. Usually this means that they will gaslight them into having a particular worldview, which is then going to be respected by other academics, and that is then going to trickle down to the regular people world. The Feed, which is the social media experts that basically spend their whole day hanging out on Discord so they can tell the NWO what everyone's going to be talking about in a couple days. And of course the aforementioned Q Division, which makes all the gadgets. The Progenitors are in the business of reality deviance. And what I mean by that is that what they do is they actually perform reality deviance within the Technocracy, which is an organization dedicated to the stamping out of reality deviance. They are mad scientists, crazy researchers, on the very cutting edges, looking just how far Hypertech can be stretched. And sometimes some of the things that they do actually become part of consensus. Their main expertise in all this is and always has been medical science. Victor Frankenstein is the classic archetypal progenitor, and that is not just in the sense that he was a mad scientist, but also that he literally created new life. And that's something the progenitors spend a whole lot of time and energy on. They're not trying to necessarily upgrade humanity through cybernetics like Iteration X is, but to make it anew entirely. Which isn't to say they don't use cybernetics at all, also, it's just that that's not the thing they mainly prefer to do. And much like Victor Frankenstein, they have unleashed a whole slew of horrors onto the world with all their failed projects. They used to not care about any form of ethics in any way, shape, or form ever, just destroying human life and limb as they saw fit just to see what they could come up with. And it causes a lot of damage to people and society. Forget like eugenics and phrenology, although that certainly is stuff that they came up with. I'm talking zombie outbreaks, fake human creatures that are performing slave labor in deep space, man-made horrors beyond your comprehension. And in spite of their allegedly very good security, a lot of progenitor creations have managed to escape their labs and find their way to the front lines, causing irreparable damage to consensus that had the NWO hyperventilating for decades. This is until one day, perhaps due to the dimensional anomaly, the progenitors' internal money people went, nuh-uh, and majorly reshuffled the whole organization to focus away from the science and genetic engineering of let's just see what's going to happen, and more onto preparing humanity for the real crises that are coming. And also ideally working with other conventions to stop these crises from coming up altogether. I'm talking climate change here, by the way. That's one of the main ones that they have directed their efforts at combating. None of the other conventions have changed so drastically and so quickly. Well, I mean, maybe except for the Void Engineers, but that really depends on the timeline, I guess. And many of the old school progenitors, and those who hope to become like them, are not very happy about this. The whole convention is structured a lot more like research universities than anything else. It's rather non-authoritarian. People are encouraged to be individuals. They're actually deeply interwoven with the global scientific and academic elite, which gives them ample opportunity to detect anyone who might be on the verge of awakening to the secrets of enlightened science. And to suss out whether university hierarchy is structured like the progenitors or whether the progenitors hierarchy is structured like that of a university is sort of a chicken and egg type situation, which a lot of progenitors could actually tell you which was first. It was the 3D printer. And the only reason these changes could be implemented at all within the convention is because the progenitors actually make a ton of money for the technocracy. They hold a lot of medical and other technological patents, and while they are of course not entirely self-funded given how expensive much of their research is, a lot of their funding actually comes internally through research grants. And all the money people had to do to refocus the efforts of the entire convention was to not give the money to psychopaths. Although where those money people got their conscience from is a kind of a mystery, really. That doesn't mean they don't still have a ton of interesting projects going on. They have an underwater research station manned almost exclusively by dolphins and octopuses, although then I suppose it would be dolphined and octopused. They're involved in various de-extinction efforts, including fucking dinosaurs, various interpretations of them. Neanderthals too, they made Neanderthals. Apparently very nice, very kind people. They are battling death itself, which I of course think is very cool. Oh, and did I mention they're building the actual literal Avengers? Yeah, the Progenitors are trying to make superheroes. Like, that's how they think they're gonna solve a lot of problems, by introducing superheroes to the world. But these days, their efforts truly are focused on making more people more healthy by developing novel medical treatments. Or rather, introducing those treatments and medicines into the consensus, because most of the actual work of creating them has already happened. Now it's about actually applying it to reality, which can be rather difficult in the field, given that there's a lot of distrust of big pharma around the world, not to mention consensus fracturing in general. So they've had to become a little tricky in their approaches to certain communities. One thing they do now is they pretend to be New Age medicine. You know all the stories where the parents chose not to pursue cancer treatment for their child, but through prayers and faith, the child healed anyway? Yeah, unless a chorister was involved, it was not prayer that did it. It was a snake oil salesman that gave them some kind of magical thing that they would rub on their child's forehead, and that snake oil then contained progenitor-developed nanomachines that went into the child's body and killed the cancer. Now, this does create a little bit of a conundrum that sort of illustrates the divides within the technocracy pretty well. Because not only is that, like, clear reality deviance that violates consensus and invites paradox, it also, because it happened, like, sneakily, reinforces the idea that faith healing can work in people's minds. I mean, they literally saw it happen, and that's bad for the type of rationalistic consensus the Technocratic Union is trying to build. On the other hand, what are you gonna let the kid die? It is the mission of the technocracy to protect humanity from the predations of superstitionism. What could more strongly embody that mission than saving the life of a child from the predations of its parents' superstitious beliefs? One of the major projects dedicated to reconciling that divide is probably that the nanites that were given to the child may have included certain agents that also restructured its brain and made it believe in technocratic consensus. This is usually done in tandem with NWO efforts, because developing those kinds of nanites is much more resource intensive, and they specialize in the kind of social manipulation to make that happen anyway. But the progenitors are in fact trying to science pill people. Some common foci that are very popular with progenitors is the development and testing of novel scientific theories. Now you might say, Burger, isn't what the progenitors do as scientists also will working, because that is how the science works even for progenitor technocrats, and isn't that kind of an inherent violation that exists in contradiction to the very way of how science works and how science is done? So can these people really call themselves scientists if they know that the research that they do doesn't work the way science does? And the answer to that is no. You just don't understand enlightened science. They also have generously equipped laboratories full of expensive gear and staff that works tirelessly. The whole vast field of experimentation, whether that be sort of surgery, CRISPR grafting, or chemical synthesis, anything you can picture people doing in a lab could potentially be a focus. Much like the belief that just having enough funding can get the job done. Controversially, a lot of especially progenitors believe in discredited pseudoscientific theories to work their enlightened science. Those are part of their personal paradigm, especially older and more influential ones. So in spite of the convention's frequent attempts to bring these people into the present, there is something deeply idiosyncratic of how magic and enlightened science work, and many of these people are used to working under conditions that do adhere to their personal worldview far away from the front lines. And they have name recognition, achievement, connections, contacts that go back a long time within the Progenitors. Keeping them in check is a project in its own right. Some projector methodologies include the applied sciences, an extremely varied group of individuals who share experience and resources with each other to field test various progenitor projects out there on the front lines. The facade engineers who can actually trace their roots back all the way to the Kosian society in ancient Egypt and who work on developing new forms of humanity based on the human blueprint. The E in facade, by the way, stands for eugenics. It is, in fact, an acronym. And the pharmacopeists, who trace their roots back to different parts of the Kosian Circle, who used to be the more rationally minded herbalists and alchemists, but are now modern-day pharmacists and apothecaries. Which, you know, if you do go to pharmacies, there is a certain degree of magic about those places. I have always found it fascinating. You go in there, you give them a slip of paper, and they come back with some substance that will heal you. It will change the way your body works. And I don't know what goes on in the back there, but I would really love to see it. The Syndicate makes money. No, seriously, they make it. That's what they do. They make the money. They're not just big business, they are the bigger fish in the pool that big business only ever gets to see the vague outline of. So yeah, the Technocratic Union requires an unfathomable amount of funding to do what it does. And it's the Syndicate's job to bring in that cash supply. They manage the Union's assets and fund its projects, which you may think gives them a huge amount of power. And that is entirely correct. It's very true. They are extremely powerful. While they don't exactly dominate the other conventions, especially if the dimensional anomaly occurred, they will be the most powerful among them. This is because they are much more earthbound than the other conventions. They had very few horizon constructs in the first place and even kept a lot of management directly on Earth. The Syndicate thrives in human society. They have obscene, unspeakable amounts of wealth. They don't need space stations. They have everything they could possibly ever want right here. So when the dimensional anomaly destroyed most of the technocracy's space infrastructure, they are the convention that lost the least. If rebuilding efforts are underway, they are currently dishing out copious amounts of Skrilla, which would push them to capacity in their ability to generate cash flow, but also put them in an extremely powerful position at a point where the technocracy is at its weakest. Holding the purse strings in moments of transformation gives you the ability to set up a lot of systemic factors that are gonna play in your favor way into the future. So many among the conventions feel like the Syndicate is, especially right now, too powerful. Especially for a group that so often conflicts with the ideals of the technocracy. You see all the hierarchy problems in the technology that I mentioned earlier, where being a blood-sucking psychopath is the easiest way to the top? Nowhere is this worse than within the Syndicate. Seriously, especially for unenlightened personnel, for sleepers, and a lot of extraordinary citizens, being in the Syndicate, it's an extremely toxic culture. Going so far that the Mage splat books say explicitly that the technocracy has like zero tolerance for sexual harassment, except for the Syndicate. The Syndicate can have a little bit of sexual harassment as a treat. After all, what is the point of being powerful if you're not going to be using that power for your own personal enjoyment? Yeah, that kind of like slimy ass bullshit is the whole MO of the Syndicate. And they get away with it because they control the money, and their entire ethos is to make as much money as possible, no matter the cost. To that end, not only are they big in all of the legitimate corporate conglomerates of the world, they also control organized crime, global cartels. Yeah, that spaceship you're flying in? El Chapo paid for it. They are also one of the Union's most gaping security holes, especially through the famous Special Projects Division, which worked with the conglomerate Pentex of Werewolf the Apocalypse fame, very evil corporation, before the Special Projects Division was dissolved. And yet, somehow, even though the Special Projects Division no longer exists, unfathomable amounts of money are being sent to the technocracy for things that it does. and like not even management knows what's going on, but hey, it's free cash. It's for this kind of shit that NWO forensic auditors love to give the Syndicate a little slap on the fingers when the higher-ups deem it necessary, aka when they can get away with it. And in a sort of ironic twist, the Syndicate is the only convention of the technocracy that has actively gotten worse over the past few decades. It used to be home to various economic theories and models and ideas of how business should be run, but with the rise of dog-eat-dog neoliberal capitalism, the logic of it is morally righteous when it generates a lot of profit has brought the Syndicate's worst qualities to the fore. They seriously dropped the ball in Russia and a lot of other post-Soviet states with the whole communism-capitalism conflict, just completely folding the cards on the communist members of the Syndicate for the sake of personal power play and internal politicking, and then ruining the Russian economy with shock therapy introduction of neoliberal capitalism. That's a historical fact, by the way. All the poverty that you see in Russia, that only happened after the Soviet Union was dismantled and had all of its stuff being sold off to extremely rich people. Before the fall of the Soviet Union, Russians were eating the best out of all of the people in the world. And the people who got all those state assets through their political connections are known as the oligarchs today. However, even within the Syndicate, a lot of individuals, especially of the more theory-inclined side of understanding how the magic of money works, have been calling for a little bit of a restructuring, and it all ultimately comes down to the idea of consensus viability. Humans contribute to the consensus in roughly equal amounts. They believe things, and then those things are real, and the technocracy's approach has been to obviously make it so the consensus they want people to believe in is one that is appealing to those people. To put it in economic terms, regular people need to see a good return on investment into the consensus. Otherwise, they'll just choose a different reality to invest in, which is something that's happening with a lot of disgruntled people these days. Thus, the fact of the socialist ownership of the consensus turns out to be one of those irrefutable realities that the Syndicate must adapt to. At least such is the theory. The people who are proposing it are very much in the minority. Because of course, the Syndicate continues to recruit primarily people who are ruthless and devoid of compassion. They value self-motivation, ingenuity, the grind set. One of the things they're also very traditionally liberal in is the fact that they have no hard new life, old life divide, because usually when you ascend into the Syndicate, retaining your old business contacts is very fucking useful. You don't want to enter the business org and immediately lose all your assets. That would be a huge waste. The idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is deeply ingrained into the notions of how they view magic. Syndicate technocrats often master the prime sphere, which they understand as being called primal utility. And to them, the most perfect representation of primal utility is money. Because much like primal utility, money is essentially an unseen, invisible, abstract force that can sometimes manifest in like bills of cash, but usually just sort of exists out in the ether and can make pretty much anything happen. Like seriously, money is the greatest reality-shaping power in existence. Which, come to speak of it, like a wad of cash is a great quintessence storage type deal for technocrats of this particular orientation. They are the ones working on making the entire world cashless, which I, as a cash kind of guy, really fucking hate. But it makes money more abstract and thus more like Prime. Really, the whole convention is the most mystical of all of the ones within the Technocratic Union. They even have this ironic understanding of themselves as being people who do magic. They call themselves the Magic Men. In terms of foci of how they channel their magic, of course, the most common is the famous Art of Desire, which is something you may have heard of. Visualizing things in order to make them happen. Not very technological, as you can see. They also use marketing, arcane models of hypereconomics, power dynamics, weird, terrible fucking psychological manipulation. Seriously, these people love gaslighting. Crypto is something that they sometimes use as a focus that they try to introduce to the consensus, but people rejected it, so they failed to introduce it. The concept of, like, the team having a bunch of eggheads that will just figure it out when you tell them to do it, that's a very common focus to manifest the magic of a syndicalist. They make the impossible happen not because they have the ability to, but because the mage believes that they can. And then, of course, just having influence matters, knowing the right people, being able to make a phone call that'll break reality. Sometimes they will do outright mystical rituals, usually involving, like, the domination and exploitation of people. Sense of style and panache, similar to what the NWO does, just with more body hair. Cocaine and every other kind of upper, which gives them a lot of similarity to the mystical tradition of the Sahajiya. Probably some of them do nofap. Every insane idea can be a focus. If you ever do find technology in their magic, it's gonna be stuff like ATMs. Never any of those weird sort of hypertech devices, because who needs that kind of shit when you have money? Some of the classic syndicate methodologies include the enforcers, also known as the Hollow Men, who reconcile the fact that ultimately all of the value that money has is entirely imaginary by making sure that there are very real consequences to people who do not pay their bills. The financiers, or as Alex Jones would call them, the globalists, because they are the worldwide network of all the big banks and big business, interlinking all of these various organizations to create a truly globalized economy. And media control, which has a lot of jurisdiction friction with the NWO much of the time, and though it is also its job to reinforce technocratic global consensus, very often what it primarily does is reinforce syndicate consensus. The Void Engineers stare into the abyss, and the abyss does its thing to them. It really depends on what abyss it specifically is. They do different things, the various kinds of abysses. Sometimes it's literal, sometimes it's metaphorical. Point is, they have seen things you people wouldn't believe. Let's face it, this is the most interesting of the conventions. Like, yeah, okay, the others are all cool and interesting, but these guys go to space. To the space of the space area. They're the space force of the Technocratic Union. Okay, maybe that's not strictly speaking all that they do, but space is in practical terms where they are located most heavily because of it's pretty big. The space is big. And they don't just explore conventional space as we think of it, as seen in the popular television show Carl Sagan's Cosmos, but the magical realms of wild spirits that is the Middle Umbra, also known as biospheric space. The abstract realm of the High Umbra, filled with lofty concepts and intellectual ideals, also known as ensemble space. Entropic space, the underworld, full of the dead, which once again I will refer you to my Wraith video if you want to learn more about that. A digital web, a newly emerging sort of space that is somehow similar. It draws parallels to biospheric space, but it's also different, and the very concept of space doesn't make as much sense in it. But then you see all the parallels of internet cables being interconnected with each other, and the mushrooms, the global mycelial network sending information like neurons, or whatever energies bind the infinite realms of the Middle Umbra together. Subspace or ether space, which is kind of like an alternate dimension of regular space, and it's full of magic. Here the various planets of our solar system map to the shard realms, which each represent one of the spheres of magic. The deep universe beyond the asteroid belt, where things get really weird really quickly, and the farther out you go, the more weird they get. Alternate timelines, one of the particularly messy exploration endeavors. Some are mapping the deep oceans of Earth, and there is some truly scary shit in there. The same is true about the last remaining true wildernesses on this planet. Think of the Amazon, the Antarctic, the deep Siberian taiga. Things are different there. Reality is just sort of absent. And they explore these places not just to see what's there for the sake of curiosity, but to understand them and become better able to protect humanity from them. That is the true purpose of the Void Engineers, to protect the borders of consensus and make sure nothing weird crosses over. Which ultimately tends to come down to just making sure that nothing crosses over them at all, for any reason. So while we do think of them as more space-based, actually a lot of Void Engineer jobs are based on Earth. And whether they constitute the majority or perhaps even the entirety of the convention really heavily depends on how you play the dimensional anomaly in your chronicle. Because for obvious reasons, it is the convention most affected by it. If it's a severe, ongoing dimensional anomaly, they're going to be very strict, tightly organized, a highly military organization, focusing on Earth mostly, perhaps trying to re-establish contact with extra-dimensional assets. If the dimensional anomaly didn't happen, they will be much more utopian, going out there, trying to find the new, the incredible wonders of the universe, supporting the vast space-based infrastructure that all the conventions utilize. The default is kind of in the middle, where they're still reeling from heavy losses and trying to sort of restructure and refocus themselves as a more pragmatic, a little less idealistic organization. They're kind of like Starfleet and Star Trek, where they have like a military structure but fundamentally understand themselves to be more of a civilian organization, where hierarchy is not necessarily a religion but a matter of being, practical. They'd probably be in the process of rebuilding as much as possible of what was lost during the dimensional anomaly, and also looking at how the dimensional anomaly changed the various other dimensions. They are perhaps the most alienated, haha pun intended, of the conventions, what with the nature of their mission usually taking place far away from the front lines. Many of them deal with aliens, be they like umbral spirits or actual aliens, more often than they do with regular people. The people that they are out there trying to protect. Many Void Engineers actually kind of see Earth as a lost cause and are considering just leaving, just fucking off, whether the rest of humanity follows along or not. They see consensus more like a cyst around this very particular place in the universe, and what it does is it protects the narrow minds of regular people, and sometimes, depending on who you fucking ask, the narrow minds of technocratic leadership. But it needs to be cut open. The pus needs to drain out of it so it can heal. They tend to recruit, obviously from astronauts, which pretty much everyone who has ever been to space, the people you see on the news, all the famous astronauts, they're all extraordinary citizens of the Void Engineers. But that does make for a rather narrow pool. There's not actually all that many astronauts out there, so they also look for all kinds of military types, especially Navy and Air Force people. The Void Engineer Marine Corps is actually the first line of defense against all types of alien incursions, and they are quite formidable. Scientists, they're like those with an obvious focus on astrophysicists, biologists, geographers, but really all kinds. Engineers, also, very obviously, it's in the name. And this very particular type of person, in modern days most commonly found among artists, who were just sort of born into the wrong era. Because there's really not that much left to explore within the bounds of generally agreed upon consensus. But these people are just born explorers. They need to go out there to explore in order to be happy. In the face of the hard collectivism of Iteration X and the NWO, and the decadent individualism of the Syndicate and the Progenitors, the Void Engineers seek to walk a middle path where you need to adhere to certain strictures that are there for a good reason, but are otherwise encouraged to be yourself. With the grand exception that almost nobody can still be in touch with their old life. Something pretty much unique to the Void Engineers is that extraordinary citizens who are not enlightened mages can rise to pretty much any rank and position. In other conventions, this does not, very rarely one will get up to middle management. Enlightenment or no, if you're a Void Engineer and you have seen what a Void Engineer has seen, you are part of the blessed and cursed few. They are considered the most extraordinary of the extraordinary citizens because they have witnessed the kinds of things that enlightened members of other conventions cannot even imagine. Which leads me to a cool tidbit, actually. The Void Engineers have therapists on staff, psychologists that they give people actual sort of psychotherapy, slots of which are popular with members of all kinds of conventions, because I'm talking actual real therapy, not like social processing, attunement, magical brainwashing. Oh, real honest to God, let's actually talk about your issues and help you deal with the stuff that you've experienced type psychotherapy. When it comes to foci, a void engineer focus is rarely going to be subtle and will usually involve all kinds of hypertechnology and weird alien shit. But it doesn't really matter if it's vulgar, because unless you're talking about a very specific subset of agents that operates surgically on the front lines to get rid of stuff that slipped the net, they're way beyond the bounds of consensus anyway. So they get to use every kind of technology that they can dream up, especially of the strange hypertech variety. Spaceships, sensors, satellites, weird astronomical models, and sort of high-end holographic orreries. There's a lot more freedom too in the kinds of cosmological models that you get to subscribe to than you might expect. And a lot of room for experimentation with all the weird shit that exists out there. If you find this strange mineral that cannot be found on Earth somewhere out there, and you really believe that using it to fuel your spaceship will make your spaceship go faster than light, your spaceship will go faster than light. Some of the rather more conventional foci include education and training, by which I mean like the belief that you have learned this protocol, you have learned how to deal with this situation, and thus you can make the magic happen that is required to deal with the situation. Spacesuits, of course, and all their fancy gimmicks, all other types of cool astronaut fashion. Yes, I am indeed naked underneath this. And let's not discount the good old sailor superstitions. Management may not like it, but the fact remains that if you adhere to certain rules and protocols and perform certain seemingly meaningless rituals before departure, your voyage will be blessed with good luck. Void engineer methodologies include the Border Corps Division, which maintains outposts just on the other side of the gauntlet of our reality to monitor for potential incursions and fight them before they can cross over at all. Sometimes that means just buying the rest of the technocracy a few more minutes to prepare. The Earth Frontier Division, which focuses on unlocking the secrets of the various unexplored areas of Earth. And the Pan-Dimensional Corps that has all the spaceships with which they go to far-off distant galaxies. And, not to cut this unnecessarily short or anything, that's it. That is the technocracy. Obviously, there's still a fuck ton left of discuss, but with all of my World of Darkness lore videos, the point is really to help you get a sense of the basics so you can understand all the details as you go do your own exploration of this immense setting. And always remember, much of the stuff you'll read is not set in stone, so if you like it, use it. If you don't like it, don't use it. Thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. You know what? Fuck it, spam them. Don't actually spam them, don't do it. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. Maybe soon I'll get to say buy my novel too, who knows? And in that spirit, I wear this outfit just for the recording, just so you know, when I wear an outfit, you know I record over several days. I'm not wearing the same outfit over several days. I'm just putting it on for the recording. And see you around, cunts.